be discussed. CBS News chief White House correspondent Major Garrett has more on the president's stance in the wake of the attack. So, Major, just a week ago, we heard President Trump say, the likelihood of American forces being pulled out of Syria will probably occur. It'll happen very soon. Things may have changed a little bit. What do you suppose his military advisors are saying to him now?
Well, these are really distinct issues, though they often commingle themselves in Syria. What do I mean by distinct issues? Well, there's the U.S.-led effort to defeat ISIS, which had territorial occupancy of some parts of Syria. That's one issue. The other issue is a long-running, now 7-year Syrian civil war carried out to protect the Assad regime against various rebel forces within that country. Like I said, these are separate tactical and strategic issues, the civil war, the fight against ISIS, but they oftentimes bump into each other in the nation of Syria, and they're bumping into each other now. How do I mean? Well, if there is a U.S. military response to this alleged and suspected chlorine attack that killed several people, it would not be the first chlorine attack suspected in the Syrian civil war. It would be one of many, in fact, but the most deadly recently. Then the U.S. would be sending a signal about, if not its involvement in that civil war, its involvement in punishing the Assad regime, which, if it did carry this out, did as part of its effort to win that civil war. That's separate from the ISIS question, which is the president wants to pull the roughly 2,000 U.S. forces out of Syria, sent there to aid in the effort to defeat ISIS and take its territory back, and not get it in U.S. hands, not get it into the Assad regime hands, just defeat ISIS. What happens to that territory? Who knows? The United States and the Trump administration have not been very clear about what its priorities are in Syria after ISIS is defeated, because then you have to reconcile yourself to, okay, you've taken that territory away from ISIS, who gets it? We don't want it to happen to the Assad regime. Why? Because this administration thinks the Assad regime carries out war crimes and is lost all legitimacy. Well, then who gets the land? That's a question this administration, just like the previous one, the Obama administration, could not answer. So that's how these two issues come together, the fight against ISIS and the civil war, and the war crimes carried out as that civil war is prosecuted. So what this administration now faces, the president has some national security meetings this morning, later on this afternoon, then the meeting tonight over dinner with his military advisors. What's the appropriate response? Does it risk direct involvement with the Russians on the ground in Syria? And what's the follow-on? All those things, just like Holly said, part of this basket of unanswered questions.
So then you throw into the mix a new national security advisor, the third one so far, John Bolton, known for being particularly hawkish. What sort of impact do you think he will have on the Trump administration's plan for Syria, for Russia in Syria, for ISIS?
It's a fascinating question, and it really is going to be one of those answered over the passage of time. It's one thing to be a pundit. It's one thing to be an editorialist about foreign policy. It's fundamentally different to be a national security advisor. Not only are you giving advice directly to the president, which can then be carried out, the job of national security advisor, as constructed, is to be the honest broker coordinating all issues and all advice for the president, being an honest broker with the State Department, the Defense Department, CIA, every part of the national security apparatus. That's not been something associated with John Bolton's career in government, being a good collaborator. He's a strong-willed person, has a strong ideology, usually on the neoconservative, interventionist, hawkish side of things. But his job now is to coordinate and listen and then provide evidence from all parties, not just his own. So these are really two important questions. How much of his agenda will he drive? How honest a broker will he be in coordinating all the other advice the president gets? And moving from op-ed writer and pundit to national security advisor is a significant change, not only in job, but what you're actually courageous enough to recommend and see put in place. All those things are now part of the John Bolton reality in this White House starting today, and we'll see how it plays out.
Before we let you go, I got to ask you a couple questions about the president and China. So the president tweeted earlier this morning about China's tariffs on U.S. cars, calling it, quote, a stupid trade. So this is really a far cry from what he tweeted over the weekend, where he said, you know, his counterpart, Xi Jinping, that they would always be friends. How are we to interpret what appears to be mixed messages?
Well, you can be friends with someone and still have significant disagreements, and that's where the White House is trying to characterize this. A good relationship with President Xi and those around him, but nevertheless serious disputes over trade. The question really here is not about the tweets, it's about how to approach successfully the Chinese to resolve these differences. Historically, through many administrations, Republican and Democrat, the method had always been not to challenge the Chinese publicly. Why? The very deep sense that because of the Chinese approach to negotiations, if you call them out publicly, you have in some way shamed them or called them to account in a public way that embarrasses them. And that, the theory has always been, will only intensify whatever the bad behavior it is you're trying to change, because they will have felt embarrassed publicly. And so every administration before this one has always tried to handle this quietly, on the edges, and through long-running and tenacious diplomacy. I asked Larry Kudlow, the president's new National Economic Council advisor, on Friday, why are you abandoning that long-held approach? He said, because it didn't work, and we have to try something different. We have to confront them. We have to confront them publicly and show them the costs that they will incur if, in fact, this becomes a trade war. Larry Kudlow, like the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, don't predict a trade war. They believe this will all be negotiated out. But if the Chinese stick to their long-established pattern of pressing ahead and being even more aggressive once called to account, then we are heading to a trade war. And the one thing I detect here at the White House is they're not quite sure how to play that out to the ultimate end. So we're in this interesting place where the conversation has started, the intensity is growing, the sense of grievance on the Chinese part is high. The Trump administration also feels aggrieved, and then it's going to have to calm down. How it calms down, nobody here quite knows.
Well, that's a little unnerving. I would hope that there's a little more of a basic plan in place that maybe we don't know about. Interesting is an interesting word. Major Garrett.